Princess Catherine did not simply receive a letter. She received a voice from the past, carried through lawyers, silence, royal grief, and years of careful protection. When solicitors finally verified that Diana's sealed note had reached Catherine's hands, the moment became more than private inheritance. It became a collision between two women who never truly met, yet were suddenly bound by destiny. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine sat in the room at Kensington Palace, her fingers closed around the sealed envelope as if the paper carried a heartbeat. William stood close enough to see her hands tremble, yet far enough to let the moment belong to her. Diana's name filled the silence, and the prince understood this was not another palace document to be managed. This was his mother reaching across years of pain, and Catherine was chosen to receive it. The solicitors had spoken with cold precision, but their words landed like thunder. Solicitors are legal professionals who verify documents, protect instructions, and confirm whether private papers have been handled according to law. Their finding was direct. A sealed personal note, written by Diana, Princess of Wales, had reached Catherine after guarded custody. It had not been mislaid. It had not been forgotten. It had been preserved until one condition was fulfilled. William watched Catherine lower her eyes to the seal, and he knew why the room felt dangerous. Diana had not written for a crowd. She had not written for newspapers or ceremonies. A royal household means the private staff and advisors who manage palace duties, access, and sensitive family matters. But even that machinery had no right to stop this message. The verification confirmed that no advisor could intercept the note. Catherine drew a slow breath before breaking the seal, and the movement changed everything. William saw emotion cross her face before a single line had been read, and his control began to crack. He wanted to shield her from Diana's memory, yet he knew the note belonged in Catherine's hands. The woman beside him had carried duty, criticism, motherhood, and silence. Now Diana's blessing recognized every battle. The seal carried Diana's mark, and that detail made the note feel alive. Catherine understood this was not a message from the past, but a test of the present. William understood something darker. If the note had waited for a condition, then someone had known it existed, and before Catherine could understand why Diana had chosen her, she first had to face the people who had been waiting in silence around that sealed envelope. The shock was not only that Diana had written the note, the deeper wound was that she had written it for a future Catherine, a woman she would never meet, yet somehow seemed to understand. Inside the palace, that realization changed the air. Catherine was no longer just William's wife, future queen, or mother of heirs. She had become the keeper of Diana's unfinished emotional truth. Catherine read the first lines without speaking, and the silence around her felt heavier than any royal ceremony. She had spent years carrying a role that looked polished from the outside, but cut deeply in private, because every smile, every choice, every moment beside William was measured against the memory of Diana. The title future queen consort meant the wife of a future king, the woman expected to support the crown and stand beside the monarch. But in that room the title suddenly felt smaller than the burden placed inside her hands. William moved closer, yet he did not touch the paper. The prince understood that the note came from his mother, but the moment belonged to Catherine. He had lived with Diana's absence as a wound that never fully closed, and now her words had arrived at the most sensitive point of his adult life. The future kings could protect royal duty. He could face public storms. But he could not protect himself from the sound of his mother speaking through a page that had waited years to be opened. Catherine lowered the note slightly as tears gathered, overwhelmed by the intimacy of a woman she could only imagine. Diana had not written with cold royal formality. She had written as a mother, as a woman who understood loneliness, pressure, and the sharp edge of public love. Then Catherine reached the line that stopped her completely. The woman who will hold his hand when the crown feels cold. The words cut through protocol. They were not about jewels, rank, or ceremony. They were about survival. William heard the phrase and looked away, because Diana had named the fear he had never said aloud. A solicitor then explained, in a careful voice, that the note had been attached to a sealed instruction concerning his future marriage. A sealed instruction meant a private legal direction, protected until certain conditions were met, and this one had created an emotional bridge no courtier could erase. Catherine understood then that Diana had not only imagined her, she had trusted her. The tenderness of that trust made the next truth more painful. If Diana's note had been guarded by instruction, then someone had known about it. Someone had seen its power. Someone inside the royal system had allowed Catherine to be measured against Diana, while keeping Diana's own words out of her reach. And to understand why that note had been locked away for so many years, the palace had to return to the one private moment that started everything. Every royal secret has a beginning, but this one began with a promise made in the shadow of a balcony, no camera ever captured. Years before Catherine held the envelope, Diana had watched William endure a public ceremony with a private sadness he could not explain. That single moment became the trigger. From it came the sealed note, the legal instructions, and the silence that followed. Diana saw what others missed. The world saw a young prince standing where history expected him to stand, carrying the calm face of duty, while the palace moved around him with perfect order. But his mother saw the pain beneath that stillness. William had smiled because he had been trained to smile. He had remained composed because the crown demanded composure before he even understood the cost. And in that moment, Diana understood something terrifying. One day, her son would inherit not only a throne, but a loneliness no title could protect him from. William left the ceremony with his emotions locked behind silence, but Diana followed the silence. A formal palace balcony appearance meant one of those carefully arranged royal moments where the family stood together before the public, showing unity even when private tension lived behind the walls. After it ended, Diana drew him away from the pressure, knelt beside him, and adjusted his collar with a mother's tenderness. The prince tried to hold himself together, but she saw his eyes shining. Palace aides wanted movement. They wanted timing. They wanted the day to continue. Diana wanted the truth. That private conversation became the wound she could not ignore. William did not need another lesson in duty. He needed someone, someday, who would know when the crown had become too heavy and would not leave him alone under its weight. Diana carried that fear into the night, and it followed her into every word she wrote. She wrote not for power, she wrote for protection. She wrote for a future woman whose name she did not know, but whose heart she already seemed to be asking for. The sealed note became more than paper. A legal instruction meant a written direction, attached to a private document, telling solicitors when and how it could be released. Diana's direction was precise. The note must only reach William's wife when she had proven loyalty, not through title, applause, or royal polish, but through a private family crisis, where Diana's memory could have been used as a weapon. Catherine had faced that moment, and refused to turn the late princess into ammunition. The solicitors now identified that condition as fulfilled, and the meaning landed with brutal force. Catherine had not earned the note by becoming admired. She had earned it by staying loyal when silence would have been easier and revenge would have been understood. William realized his mother had created a test no palace advisor could fake. But when the trigger was revealed, it pointed toward one explosive confrontation with the person who believed Diana's note should never have reached Catherine at all. And once the past was no longer buried, the confrontation everyone feared became impossible to avoid. The confrontation did not happen in a grand hall or beneath glittering chandeliers. It happened in a closed private room where no camera waited, no crowd cheered, and no palace statement could soften the truth. Catherine entered holding Diana's note. William stood beside her in controlled silence, and across the room sat the people who had underestimated how far a quiet woman could be pushed. Catherine did not rush. She carried the note like something sacred and dangerous, because it was both. The solicitors had already verified its origin, and that changed everything. Solicitors are legal professionals who confirm whether private papers are real, protected, and delivered according to lawful instructions. Their finding meant Diana's words were no longer rumor, memory, or family emotion. They were verified. They were protected. They were Catherine's to hold. And that made every person in the room understand that silence could no longer be used as a shield. William stood beside her, with the stillness of a man holding back years of anger. Charles watched his son carefully, knowing the prince was not only defending his wife, but also defending his mother's final private trust. Camilla sat across from them with a hard expression, and the queen consort seemed to understand that Diana's voice had entered the room in a way no title could push aside. Senior advisors kept their papers close, but their control was slipping. Legal representatives waited, because the next question could cut through years of palace caution. Catherine placed the note on the table with careful hands. The small sound of paper meeting polished wood carried more force than any raised voice. She looked at Charles, then at the solicitors, and asked why a message meant for her had taken so long to arrive. Her voice shook, but it did not break. William heard the pain beneath her control, and the future king stepped forward just enough to make his loyalty clear. William spoke to Charles in a low, firm tone, telling the king that Diana's final private trust should never have become a palace negotiation. A private trust means a protected arrangement created to guard personal wishes, documents, or property for a specific purpose. Charles absorbed the words without answering at first, because he knew the accusation was larger than one envelope. It was about whether the monarchy had protected peace by burying truth. Then the solicitor confirmed the detail that changed the room. Earlier attempts had been made to delay delivery by questioning whether Catherine had standing to receive Diana's private words. Standing meant the recognized right to receive or act on a legal matter, and the challenge had been used like a locked gate. Camilla's expression tightened when the record showed that no consort, advisor, or household office had the authority to override Diana's sealed instruction. Catherine looked down at the note, then lifted her eyes again. She no longer seemed fragile. She seemed wounded into courage. The room had expected tears, perhaps even retreat, but Catherine had brought the one question no one wanted spoken. Who signed the objection that kept the envelope locked away? And the answer to that question did not only expose a delay, it revealed the quiet machinery of power behind the decision. Power inside a palace rarely announces itself loudly. It appears in initials on a margin, a delayed file, a phrase rewritten by someone who knows exactly how authority moves in silence. When the solicitors opened the custody record, Catherine saw the truth with devastating clarity. Diana's note had not drifted through history by accident. It had been held in place by a decision. Catherine kept her posture calm, but calm was no longer peace. It was control under pressure. The custody record lay before her, carrying the history of every hand that had guarded, delayed, reviewed, and questioned the sealed message. A custody record means the official trail showing who held a private document, when it moved, and why it stayed protected. This one showed a formal challenge raised against releasing Diana's note, not by the late princess's own solicitors, but through a palace channel that claimed the message might destabilize family unity. William understood the phrase immediately, and the prince's jaw tightened. Family unity had become the polished reason for emotional silence. The future king knew what those words could hide, because the monarchy had used calm language before, to soften painful choices. A palace channel means an internal route used by royal staff or advisors to send requests, objections, or instructions without turning them into public decisions. Here, that channel had carried a warning. Diana's private words could strengthen Catherine's authority beside William. Charles read the entry once, then again, as if the meaning might change if he slowed down. It did not. The king removed his glasses and set them down with a restraint that made the room colder. He did not look at William at first, and that silence said enough. Charles understood that the damage had already reached his son. He understood that Diana's note had not been treated as a mother's final blessing, but as a force to be managed. Catherine's hands tightened around the edge of the chair, yet she did not allow anger to take over. The future queen consort knew what the delay meant. Diana had reached toward her with trust, and someone had answered that trust with fear. A private trust of correspondence means a protected collection of letters or messages held under legal instruction for a chosen purpose. The solicitor explained that Diana's instruction was personal, lawful, and strong enough to override the old objection. William heard the next detail, and something inside him shifted. The file had been reviewed more recently than anyone admitted. This was not ancient confusion, not forgotten paperwork buried beneath changing reigns and fading memories. It was a living decision, protected by palace caution, and renewed by people who still feared what Diana's voice could do. Catherine looked toward William, and the prince no longer seemed torn between patience and pain. He had understood enough. The note had been intentionally kept from his wife, and that truth demanded more than disappointment. It demanded a choice. Because the moment the legal truth became undeniable, every person in that room had to decide whether loyalty meant silence or confession. Fallout does not always begin with shouting. Sometimes it begins when a prince pushes back his chair, when a king cannot meet his son's eyes, when a future queen folds a letter and realizes the palace has protected order more fiercely than it protected truth. In that room, silence became heavier than accusation, and Catherine understood that Diana's note had changed the family forever. William pushed back his chair, and the sound cut through every careful excuse left in the room. The prince had listened to explanations, records, and polished phrases, but none of them could soften the truth. Diana's sealed note could no longer be treated as a private legal irregularity. A legal irregularity means a problem in how a document was handled or delayed, but this had become something far larger. It was now a family crisis, because the delay had touched grief, marriage, trust, and the memory of a mother whose absence still ruled the room. Catherine stepped away from the table, not with victory, but with sadness. She had received the note, yes, but the cost of receiving it had opened another wound. The future queen consort turned inward, overwhelmed by the realization that Diana's words had waited, while palace caution stood guard. Advisors urged restraint, warning that the matter should be recorded carefully and contained quietly. An internal record means a private palace file written to preserve decisions without making them public. But William refused to let his mother's voice disappear into another controlled phrase. Charles finally spoke, and his words carried the weight of a father who could no longer hide behind the crown. He told William that fear had played its part. Fear of reopening Diana's wounds. Fear of dividing the family again. Fear of letting old pain step back into the present. The king did not defend every decision, and William heard the difference. Charles was not speaking as the monarch protecting the institution. He was speaking as a man who knew his silence had allowed colder hands to move in his name. Catherine folded the first page with careful respect, and her grief deepened when the solicitors revealed the final shock. Diana's note included a second sealed page, intended for William and Catherine together, to be opened only after the first page had been acknowledged. A sealed page means an attached message protected until a required moment arrives, and this one was not legal command or royal strategy. It was personal. It spoke of marriage, duty, and the loneliness that can live behind palace strength. William looked at Catherine, and the room seemed to fall away around them. The prince understood that no solicitor, advisor, or royal shield could stand between them and the next words from his mother. He did not open the second page there. Instead, he asked Catherine to leave the room with him, because what came next was not for the monarchy to manage. It was for a husband and wife to face together. And away from the machinery of monarchy, Catherine and William finally faced the note as husband and wife. The turning point came not through a decree, statement, or royal command. It came in a private room where Catherine and William sat side by side with Diana's words between them. No advisors entered. No solicitors explained. No palace voice translated grief into policy. For the first time, Catherine was not being watched as future queen. She was simply a woman receiving trust from another woman's heart. Catherine entered that quieter space, carrying the second page like something too fragile for the world outside. William followed her without speaking, and the prince seemed stripped of every public shield he had worn in the other room. They had left behind solicitors, advisors, and the cold language of custody records. A decree means an official command from authority, and a royal statement means a public message issued to control how events are understood. But this moment needed neither. Diana's words did not need managing. They needed to be heard. William unfolded the page first, and his breath changed before his voice did. He began to read aloud, steady at first, then slower, as if every line reached somewhere he had tried to protect for years. Diana was not writing about rank. She was writing about the loneliness that can follow duty into marriage, into fatherhood, into rooms where everyone bows, but few people truly see the person behind the role. William reached one sentence and stopped. His voice broke because his mother had named the fear he never wanted Catherine to carry alone. Catherine took his hand before the silence could swallow him. She finished the sentence softly, crying not from weakness, but from the weight of being trusted by a woman whose memory still shaped the monarchy. Diana urged the future wife of William to never let the crown harden his heart. The crown means the monarchy itself, the duties, expectations, and public burden carried by those closest to the throne. In that line, Catherine heard both warning and blessing. She understood that Diana had seen power's danger before anyone else would admit it. William looked at Catherine differently then, not as the future queen consort, not as the steady figure beside him, but as the person his mother had trusted before she even knew her name. The emotional inheritance was clear now. It was not a title, jewel, or secret advantage. It was comfort. Diana's true gift was the permission to protect tenderness inside a family, trained to hide pain behind duty. Catherine realized that the softness others might mistake for weakness was exactly what Diana had wanted preserved. Diana's final instruction carried no revenge. It did not ask Catherine to fight old battles or punish old wounds. It named love as the only force strong enough to survive palace life. And that truth changed everything between husband and wife. William folded the page slowly, and Catherine held his hand tighter, knowing they would have to return to the family with this blessing in their hearts. Because while the note was born in secrecy, its meaning could no longer remain hidden from the nation watching the monarchy breathe differently. By morning, the palace could not control the emotional force of what had happened. The story moved from private corridors to breakfast tables, television studios, and crowds outside royal gates. Britain did not see a legal file. It saw Diana's handwriting reaching Catherine after all these years. And in that single image, the public found grief, justice, memory, and a future queen, suddenly wrapped in the nation's sympathy. Catherine had left the private room with William, carrying more than a message. She carried a meaning the palace could not reduce to careful wording. When the official confirmation came, it was brief, restrained, and almost cold. The palace confirmed that Diana's sealed personal note had been verified by solicitors and received by Catherine. A palace confirmation means an official statement released to acknowledge an event without giving away every private detail. But this one did not calm the nation. It did the opposite. It opened a wound everyone still remembered. William understood why. The prince knew Diana had never belonged only to palace history. She belonged to public grief, to mothers who remembered her pain, to sons who understood his silence, and to millions who felt that her voice had been locked away too long. The monarchy tried to frame the matter as private, but the public saw the symbol immediately. Diana's words had reached the woman now standing beside her son, raising his children, and preparing to carry the future of the crown with him. Catherine appeared briefly at a scheduled engagement, composed but softer than usual. The crowd outside Kensington Palace sensed it before anyone spoke. The usual noise faded into something almost reverent, because people were not looking at rank in that moment. They were looking at a woman who had been handed an emotional inheritance no ceremony could create. William stood half a step behind her, protective and subdued, and the future king looked less like a public figure than a son still standing in the shadow of his mother's love. Catherine accepted white roses from a young girl, and the moment became impossible to control. The child's mother whispered, "Diana would have wanted this," and those words moved through the crowd like a verdict. White roses became the symbol of the mourning, not because the palace chose them, but because the public did. A broadcaster later framed the story as the moment Diana's memory moved from sorrow into succession, meaning her private legacy had become part of how people understood the future monarchy. Then came the front page that froze the country. A major morning newspaper printed an empty cream envelope under the headline, "Diana's words reach Catherine." It was simple. It was devastating. It told the nation that this was not about paperwork, but about love delayed and finally delivered. Yet the deepest verdict was not written in ink. It was forming behind palace doors, where Catherine, William, Charles, and the crown faced what Diana's note now demanded of them. And when the noise of the world faded, only one truth remained for Catherine, William, Charles, and the crown. They were all bound to serve. In the end, Diana's sealed note did not destroy the royal family. It forced the family to look at itself without ceremony. It made Catherine weep, William remember, Charles reckon, and the palace surrender one truth it had tried too long to manage. The note was not a weapon. It was a final act of maternal trust, and Catherine became the woman strong enough to receive it. Catherine understood that the note had become a defining moment in her royal life, not because it gave her more power, but because it revealed the human weight behind the crown. The monarchy had always measured her through duty, patience, and public strength, yet Diana's words reached deeper than all of that. They confirmed that Catherine's role was not only constitutional, meaning connected to the rules and duties of monarchy, but deeply personal. She was not simply standing beside William, she was helping him survive the loneliness his mother had feared. Charles knew the family could not bury the message again. The king met Catherine privately, and his voice carried a rare heaviness, as he admitted he should have ensured the note reached her sooner. He did not hide behind advisors, files, or careful palace language. He faced her as a man who understood the cost of delay. Catherine listened without anger, and that restraint unsettled him more than accusation could have. Her silence was not weakness. It was mercy sharpened by truth. William accepted that Diana's private words now belonged where they had always been meant to rest, with him and Catherine. Not in a vault, not in a committee file, and not under the control of palace caution. A private family archive means a protected collection of personal papers kept for family memory rather than public display. The prince placed the note there only after Catherine chose its place, because this was not a trophy, a scandal, or a weapon. It was sacred proof that love had outlasted obstruction. Catherine folded the note carefully and told Charles that Diana's words would be honored through how she protected William and their children. The king heard the promise and understood its power. Diana had trusted the future not to an institution, but to compassion inside one family. That was the final revelation. No title could replace it. No ceremony could create it. No advisor could control it, once it had reached the right hands. This moment did not make Catherine Diana's replacement. It made her Diana's witness. The monarchy emerged bruised but clearer, forced to admit that its future depends not only on crowns, titles, and tradition, but on the courage to let buried love finally reach the hands it was meant for. And with Diana's words finally resting where they belonged, Catherine walked forward, not in another woman's shadow, but with her blessing. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.